Once Again is funded in part by Union Bank and Trust in support of history programming on Nebraska Public Media. Family-owned for 60 years, UBT and its people are invested in the success of families, businesses, and communities. Member FDIC.
I had trouble believing that this was true. The state of Nebraska has as many thoroughbred racetracks as Kentucky. Kentucky, the Derby state. That's a little factoid I found buried in a report from a racing consultant who's advising Nebraska on the future of its horse tracks. To help save horse racing, voters in 2020 chose to allow casinos to open in Nebraska as long as each one runs a racetrack along with the blackjack and the slots. Maybe that comparison with Kentucky shouldn't be so surprising. All the way back to 1920, one of the most popular horse tracks in the country called Nebraska home, Ak-Sar-Ben in Omaha.
They're all in the gate. They're off. Grand Am fires out with breezy collision. Push my button now on the far
I don't
side.
think it's reasonable to think we'll ever get anything near Ak-Sar-Ben again.
Jockeys and trainers loved the place.
That place probably, more than anything, was the sole reason I got into training horses. Loved that place.
Race fans adored the Omaha track.
And I walked down on the apron and got close, and that feeling of being close to that finish line, it's indescribable.
A firm gift comes on for the victory. I believe Dashing Duchess touched out Shimmering Rust.
Then in the 1990s, Ak-Sar-Ben just vanished. 75 years of racing tradition erased.
Oh, it took a chunk out of me. That was my life from a teenager until my early 20s, and I knew what it meant for Omaha.
By the end, the place was sort of a ghost town and sort of sad, quiet, vacant.
If everything goes the way you hope it goes.
Replace Ak-Sar-Ben? Never.
Why did Ak-Sar-Ben fail? A beloved piece of sports history, an attraction that brought millions of dollars into Nebraska, they bulldozed the track. Gone. What went wrong? Great question now that Nebraska believes that slot machines and casino games can once again breathe life back into thoroughbred horse racing. This is Once Again, a podcast from Nebraska Public Media about the stuff of history that's shaping the news today. I'm Bill Kelly, your host and researcher. Hey, before we get started, just a heads up, there's a little salty language in a couple of places, the kind of thing you might hear out at the racetrack. I just wanted to give you a heads up if the kids are in the car. Okay, let's get on with it. You know how Ak-Sar-Ben got its name, don't you? Ak-Sar-Ben, Nebraska, spelled backwards. If you didn't know, now you do. But before we get to how a great racetrack turned into a failed racetrack, I want you to meet a guy.
Oh, I'm assuming you're Bill.
That would be correct.
Dave Anderson.
I can tell from the signage this is Anderson Racing.
This is what we do for a living.
Dave Anderson is one of the few remaining flesh and blood links to the glory days of horse racing in Nebraska.
It's a gorgeous day for you.
Yeah,
It's gonna be hot.
Just
but
a little
gorgeous.
hot. I know one thing. Come on in. I'm going to sit down.
Sure.
Do you drink coffee?
I do.
Dave invited me to come up to his stables outside of Ashland and watch his horses go through the paces. He's been at it since the 1980s.
Honestly, I'm trying to cut back. But people just keep buying goddamn horses. Which is a pain in the ass.
But it's good for the business.
But it's good for the business, yes.
The kind of people who invest in racehorses have been calling Dave lately because they want a piece of the action when all 5 Nebraska racetracks are up and running. It's early in the morning and it's hot, no breeze. On Dave's half-mile training track, a rider puts some of the horses through the paces. The first season of racing at the new casino-owned track in Columbus is a week away.
His name's Flash Drive. He's 8 years old now. And, he's made $125,000 in his career and still at it. You can fix a lot of the mental things with blinkers or with help of some drugs. But I said, there's one thing I can't fix. That's slow. I can't make a slow horse fast. It's either they got it or they don't.
This one has it.
Oh, yeah. You look good.
This is how Dave makes his money, watching a horse for weeks before it races. Dave found his passion trackside at Ak-Sar-Ben as a little kid on the days his folks would take him into Omaha on race days.
I can remember going in there when I was this big, and Dad and Mom would go gamble, and I'd be standing right there on the fence when them horses would come out on the track, and I just thought they were just neater than shit. And I don't know, in the back of my mind, I always wanted to.
So many people found their love of horses and their love of gambling at Ak-Sar-Ben.
That place probably, more than anything, was the sole reason I got into training horses. Love that place.
A place with a mythology all its own, born 100 years ago in an imaginary kingdom under the rule of a king and queen.
Ak-Sar-Ben is a myth, a once-upon-a-time myth which brings kings and queens and carnival colors to the state of Nebraska.
It's no joke. That's a film documenting the annual charity fundraising ball staged by the Knights of Ak-Sar-Ben, rulers of the Kingdom of Quivira.
Each fall, we come to this palace of Quivira for the traditional celebration of the harvest season.
I find it fascinating that this event culminated in the crowning of monarchs in Omaha.
I want to introduce you now to a friend of mine.
My name is Jenna Janovi. I'm a senior deputy editor for Enterprise Investigations at ESPN.
I know Jenna from before ESPN got her, when she worked at the Omaha World Herald in the 90s, including a stint as an assistant sports editor. She occasionally worked on stories about the races. Sometimes that intertwined with the city's power elite and the interests in the track.
The Knights of Ak-Sar-Ben is a network of Omaha business leaders. It started in the late 1800s and represented this attempt to marry Nebraska's agricultural heritage with Omaha business and economic interests.
They also hosted a massive, almost bizarre annual spectacle.
The Coronation Ball Committee transformed Ak-Sar-Ben Coliseum's arena into the Kingdom of Quivira. And there were chandeliers and glitz and a long runway.
Borrowing from Mardi Gras tradition, the Knights selected a wealthy and prominent man to be crowned as king.
Sound the royal salute and herald to the four corners of the realm.
Bankers, merchants, captains of industry.
He is a man whose leadership has contributed to the rapid growth of Nebraska's largest sports spectacle and tourist attraction.
A much younger queen escorted the king, selected from the daughters of influential families.
Chosen from among the noblest women of our gifted court, welcome now the lovely lady who will share the throne.
It was a wildly successful event.
I remember, too, because of the good deeds the organization was doing across the state and the goodwill that engendered.
County fairs, scholarships,
Exactly.
all of that.
Commitments of grant money to local projects and community development.
By 1919, the Knights of Ak-Sar-Ben wanted to create something to showcase the city's prosperity. Omaha's newspapers rallied in support.
When the Ak-Sar-Ben Exposition is completed, you will show it with pride to visitors because it will be a milestone in Omaha's progress.
Built on 130 acres of prime real estate on the edge of town, a complex of buildings and a 1-mile oval track with grandstands.
A racetrack for auto races, horse races, livestock parades, and Olympic Games.
On opening day in 1920, Ak-Sar-Ben hosted harness racing, horses careening around the curves, pulling a driver in a two-wheeled cart.
The great grandstand, while not completed, was filled to the top. More than 8,500 persons viewing the races from the structure.
On Seeley's cart, 2 drivers in the 1 cart.
A year later, jockeys on thoroughbreds replaced harness racing. All that betting brought in big money for the Knights' charities. It's interesting that through the 1920s, newspapers in town rarely acknowledged it was gambling filling the bank account of Omaha's most prominent charity. That was managed by the most respectable families in town. In practice, it was no different than the enterprise run by the small-time bookies and card sharks busted in police raids. Some Nebraska clergy and politicians noted that hypocrisy.
Representative O'Gara of Laurel made an impassioned plea to the legislature, declaring horse racing is taking money from the poor to build up Ak-Sar-Ben.
With wagering at the track so established, the Omaha Big Shots were not prepared when they came under attack. The state's top law enforcement official, Attorney General Christian Sorensen, ordered betting come to a halt at the track.
Sorensen's letter to Ak-Sar-Ben officials claimed he had received many complaints from civic leaders who say wholesale gambling tends to demoralize the young people.
Sorensen threatened to arrest both the gamblers placing the bets and the track managers taking their money.
To stop the pari-mutuels would sound the death knell of the Ak-Sar-Ben organization.
Ak-Sar-Ben went to court and lost. The state Supreme Court ruled Nebraska's constitution was clear. No one can gamble on games of chance. The betting windows at the track went dark for 6 years. Then, coming out of the Great Depression, Nebraskans thought it over and agreed they kind of liked a little recreational vice. On Election Day 1934, Nebraska repealed prohibition, putting booze back on the shelf. Voters also said yes to gambling. They rewrote the Constitution to allow for horse racing. A New York-based sports writer noticed that betting had become part of the American way of life.
For some reason or other, the last few years have constituted one of the richest and ripest gambling eras in the history of this gambling nation. The feeling in the air is unmistakable.
What followed were the glory years for thoroughbred racing at Ak-Sar-Ben. After a break during World War II, the prestige of the track grew year after year after year.
You couldn't be in Omaha and not have an awareness of that track.
People knew that Omaha was a horse racing town.
Of course, and during the heyday of the track, there were not just people in Omaha who would show up and buy a ticket and get to the grandstand, but there were busloads of people who would come up from Kansas City or over from Des Moines to spend the day or a weekend just enjoying the spectacle of it all.
In the 1960s, the Daily Racing Form reported the track pulled in $600,000 a day during race season, making it one of the most successful tracks in the nation. During race season, on the 10 o'clock news in Omaha, the prize-winning thoroughbreds became as familiar as college football players.
And your winner in the 10th, Sand Crab with Old Granddad.
Again, the winner of the Omaha Gold Cup is Gate Dancer. Imp Society was second, and Wind
They're beautiful creatures. They're giant and yet delicate. They're strong and yet brittle in ways. And the ability to stand at the apron at Ak-Sar-Ben and be close to those animals, there was nothing like it.
Moving on to the final turn, still exuberant top of the leader, Imp Society second, Triple Sec third.
It's the hoofs, it's the feeling and the sound and the atmosphere and people around you cheering and people around you happy and people around you devastated because their horse lost. It was just a scene. When they were wagering a lot, it had a sense of being a very successful enterprise in town. And when it began to not be so successful, there were lots of questions about its future.
Questions about its future? How could that be? Just 20 years after the Racing Form called it one of the most successful tracks in the country, the race fans stopped showing up. The community leaders who built the place, boasting in the 1920s it would be a milestone in Omaha's progress, talked of bulldozing the whole complex. So what happened? And what does that say about whether horse racing can make a comeback in Nebraska?
Once Again is funded in part by the John C. and Catherine S. Angle Charitable Trust in support of history programming on Nebraska Public Media.
Ak-Sar-Ben's success boosted every track in Nebraska. The state showed up to see the ponies. State Fair Park in Lincoln, Atticad in South Sioux City, the smallest tracks in Madison and Columbus. In the 1950s, racing came to Grand Island. At Fonner Park, the horses ran in early spring, even on freezing days with snow in the air. The fans showed up year after year.
They're like the San Juan Capistrano Swallows returning each year.
Chris Katulak, the head guy at Fonner Park, owes a debt to Ak-Sar-Ben. He was one of those little boys who found love at the Omaha track. The neighborhood he grew up in was close enough to smell the Ak-Sar-Ben stables, close enough to hear the anxious roar of the crowd.
And I thought, boy, what is this? And so I went to the races one day, fell in love. I'd ride my bike to the track in the morning at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and we walked horses or we cleaned stalls. And so that's my original connection with Ak-Sar-Ben.
He came of age when race fans made Ak-Sar-Ben one of the top 10 tracks in the nation.
And these people would come to town and they wanted action and they knew that they were part of something special as well.
The horse trainer Dave Anderson was there too. A teenager in the 1970s, he could pass himself off as an adult at the betting window.
Oh, I had 2 or 3 buddies. We'd pool our money and make bets amongst ourselves and do shit. And when they knew I was going to the track, they'd send money to bet on certain horses. And
Dave grew up but stayed at the track. In the 80s, he started training and entering his own horses.
I think the culture in Nebraska is different. People like coming here to race.
Why is that?
I wish I could answer that question, Bill. I don't have an answer for that. It's we've always been a horsey state.
A horsey state is actually a great description. Ak-Sar-Ben was the anchor, the foundation that built a racing circuit in Nebraska along with those smaller tracks. Every year, Nebraska-bred horses would run in over 200 days of racing at one track after another, from spring until fall, an entire circuit of races.
Back in the Ak-Sar-Ben days, we were up to like 500 and some Nebraska-bred foals every year. It was hard to get enough stalls for all the Nebraska-breds.
By the 1980s, horse racing became the #1 tourist attraction in Nebraska.
You know, Ak-Sar-Ben used to, Christ, get 20,000 people of a big weekend. I mean, it was just crazy.
But gamblers are fickle. They always look for the next big payoff. By the end of the 80s, new tracks opened in Des Moines and Kansas City.
But it began to represent competition for horse flesh, horses and horsemen.
When attendance started to drop in Nebraska, so did the prize money. Top horses and jockeys stopped showing up. The Omaha track that earned the Knights of Ak-Sar-Ben millions for its charities began to feel like a burden. The reporters and editors at the World Herald certainly took note.
When did the track become a problem?
Well, Iowa happened.
Meaning what?
So the arrival of gambling in Iowa in the mid-1980s.
Casino gambling.
Casino gambling.
It started with the dogs chasing a stuffed bunny named Lucky.
Here comes Lucky, and they're off.
In 1986, Greyhound racing moved in right across the Missouri River. 6,000 people mobbed the place on day one. Bluffs Run became one of the top dog tracks in the country.
Sixth running, and it truly has been an Iowa spectacle in Greyhound racing. Some call it the most exciting 30 seconds in Iowa Greyhound racing.
But not for long. Those fickle gamblers started drifting off again. In just 3 years, dog track attendance fell off 25%.
Into the final turn, 1, 6, 8, 2, and the 5.
How did Iowa prop up the creaky Council Bluffs track? By adding slot machines in 1995.
Bluffs Run Casino's the place to have fun, so come on and join in the song.
Then new competition floated into town. Riverboat casinos with craps, roulette, blackjack.
People would flock to Iowa to play the slots, and that was a big deal. It was a novelty, and
it's faster.
It's faster. It's an instant gratification. You can win and lose in a matter of seconds, and you didn't have to sit and watch a horse go around a mile track. So there was a lot of excitement around the riverboat casinos.
But once they aligned with casino gaming slot machines, then it...
Boom.
Yeah,
No.
then that was another gut punch to the Nebraska thoroughbred racing industry.
6 million gamblers poured through the doors of Iowa casinos in the first year. 7 out of every 10 of those customers in Council Bluffs, Iowa, reportedly came from Nebraska.
Come for the jackpots, racing and more. Excitement at every turn. Come be a winner at Ghost Run Casino.
How badly did that hurt thoroughbred racing? Betting at Nebraska tracks fell off 65% in just 5 years. The prize money handed out fell by half.
From what I recall, the final years of that track and the end of racing there felt almost inevitable.
It was around this time the most powerful people in Omaha, the Knights of Ak-Sar-Ben, the guys who brought legalized gambling to the state, decided to get out of the business. The Knights sold the track and the Coliseum to Douglas County for $25 million. That was a disaster. County officials took advantage of their positions. Racetrack finances did not improve. The track's boosters saw only one real option to stop the death spiral: do it like Iowa. Here's track manager Sharon Smith in a 1995 interview.
And we feel that the revenues from the slot machines would allow us to turn that trend around and make us more competitive even for horses.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's second race is the second division.
The speculation over the future of the track lingered like a choking smoke on the final racing day of the season, August 1995. The jockeys and trainers were frustrated.
So I sure hope it ain't the last day, but things ain't looking all that good.
A lot of the race fans conceded they'd taken their bets over to Iowa.
If they had slots in here, I'd come here and spend a lot more time and a lot more money, which generates money for somebody, huh?
There was no way the Nebraska State Legislature was going to agree to let casinos into Nebraska. A citizen petition drive failed. The tone of the whole discussion about Ak-Sar-Ben's future changed in Omaha. It wasn't about how to save the racetrack. It was about what to do with the land it occupied.
And oddly, the very same people who ran the track for all these years, the Knights of Ak-Sar-Ben, the most powerful people in the community, they all saw a different vision for that land.
Sometimes conflicting visions for it, yes.
But it didn't involve a racetrack.
No, it didn't. But I don't think any of them really thought at the time that it was going to be a forever place.
When the Knights of Ak-Sar-Ben bought the old fairgrounds back in 1919, it was on the outskirts of town. 80 years later, the city surrounded the stables and grandstands.
This was prime real estate
Prime.
in the middle of town.
Prime real estate in the middle of town. Close to the University of Nebraska at Omaha.
That needed a place to expand.
Exactly.
UNO, boxed into the north, had nowhere to go, nowhere to grow. Some of the power players wanted to replace the track with an engineering and tech campus along with residence halls.
You could almost see the saliva dripping from developers. Who could get their hands on that land and what would become of it?
That last day in the season at Ak-Sar-Ben in '96, it was a beautiful day, and the crowd was bigger than it had been in a long time. 10 races on the card. But it was over. It was done.
When Ak-Sar-Ben ran its last race and the horses finished up over the finish line, it just sort of somewhat quietly disappeared. Oh, it took a chunk out of me. You know, that was my life from a teenager until my early 20s, and I knew what it meant for Omaha.
By the end, the place was sort of a ghost town and sort of sad, quiet, vacant.
The bulldozers moved in to level the stables and grandstands once the Knights of Ak-Sar-Ben negotiated a complicated deal to buy back the track. Much of the land would be purchased by First Data of Omaha. They, in turn, donated a chunk of the acreage to the University of Nebraska Omaha campus. It ended up being a good move for the growth of the city, but wow, it hurt a lot of people.
I hate the end of the era cliche, but it felt as if that was the end of the era. There were a lot of people who truly were devastated that the track was closing.
A few of the knights were the ones that stood to prosper if that went away.
Yep. On the day I visited with horse trainer Dave Anderson, he and his helper Jerry didn't hide their bitterness 30 years after the fact.
They wanted that land more than...
It was all political.
Yes, it was. Very political.
Today, there's no sign of the track that lured Anderson into his life of horse racing. No lingering scent of manure and cigars. It's all glossy stores and offices and classroom buildings.
Oh, heartbreaker. Bill, to this day, I've not drove down 72nd Street. I don't want to see what that looks like now. I've not drove by where Ak-Sar-Ben was since 1995.
Would there still be a significant horse track in Omaha? Have they gone with slots and casinos back in the 90s?
Oh, gosh, yes. Had the casino gaming opportunity been something real and they would have done that at Ak-Sar-Ben, that place would still be a temple, I'm convinced.
Too late for Ak-Sar-Ben, but the casinos are here. In 2020, Nebraska voters, by a huge margin, changed the law and allowed Vegas-style gaming as long as the casino sits next to a horse track. Is there anything Nebraska can learn, should learn, from the failure of the state's largest track in the 1990s? Is Nebraska riding a winner, or did the glamour days of horse racing disappear when the bulldozers brought down the grandstands at Ak-Sar-Ben?
Once Again is funded in part by Union Bank and Trust in support of history programming on Nebraska Public Media. Family-owned for 60 years, UBT and its people are invested in the success of families, businesses, and communities. Member FDIC.
30 years after the demolition of Ak-Sar-Ben, horse racing is trying to make a comeback in Nebraska. Let's go back to Dave Anderson's stables. We were watching as one of his horses took a few laps around the track ahead of race day.
One of my jobs as a trainer is to watch how they move. Like this filly, she's doing real good.
After Ak-Sar-Ben closed, Anderson stayed in the business. He's been running horses at Fauner Park and other tracks. He was ready to retire from the game until Nebraska decided it still wanted to be a horsey state.
This goddamn expanded gambling bill come about 15 years too late.
That ballot initiative allowed 5 racetracks in the state to build casinos on their property. Native Americans operate 5 other casinos on tribal lands.
I guess I'm sticking around just to see this thing through.
Almost as soon as they finished adding up the ballots, Anderson started hearing from people with money willing to invest in a new generation of Nebraska-bred horses.
Then we got expanded gambling through, and that fall, I went down to Kentucky and bought, I think 8 or 9 mares for my clients.
As we walked out of the barn, we spotted sets of yearlings ready for training.
2 mares and babies out there, 2 mares and babies here, 2 mares and babies in the front pastures.
Thoroughbred breeders are getting back into the business in Nebraska. With at least 5 tracks running a full circuit by 2031, there's even some concern about a racehorse shortage. It's probably important to remember it was a shortage of people, the gamblers, that killed Ak-Sar-Ben. The lack of revenue sapped the life out of the tracks all over the country.
Since I fell in love with horse racing, 50 thoroughbred racetracks have closed. It's a mind-numbing number. And certainly 20 in this millennium have closed, and tracks that you just would not have thought would have closed.
We're back at Fauner Park with Chris Katulak.
It's the proliferation of gaming has caused horse racing to become less significant. The person who would have spent $20 or $120 at a day at the races is now spending that at a casino, and casinos are all over.
And there was Katulak leading the groundbreaking for Fauner's new racetrack casino.
And I'm not ashamed to say it. We needed to see some sort of light at the end of the tunnel, and it is casino gaming. This relationship now of casino gaming with thoroughbred horse racetracks is crucial because I don't know how we would have made it work.
Fonner had a head start when the Nebraska legislature crafted the law that put gaming and the regulations into motion. A few months later, a temporary casino was shoehorned in under the Fonner grandstands. Then casinos popped up next to tracks in Omaha, Lincoln, South Sioux City, Columbus, and soon Ogallala.
We're not going to have Ak-Sar-Ben back, but we can have a product that we're very proud of, that there will be a demand for horses and horsemen to come and run because we offer a nice experience here racing in Nebraska with thoroughbred racing.
There are plenty of risks for returning tracks and breeders and trainers in Nebraska and nationally.
Horse racing now faces a lot of really significant challenges.
I was talking about where horse racing fits in with sports fans these days with Jenna Janovy, a sports editor at ESPN.com.
But are we in a pendulum moment where we are returning to sort of this day of, hey, thoroughbred is wonderful and we're going to be investing and there will be Nebraska-bred horses and there will be a revival of thoroughbred racing in the state? Are we there? Is the state of Nebraska there?
There are questions if it's a sport that has a future.
And some might say that horse racing now has an image problem.
The romanticized sport of kings has been undercut in the wake of multiple deaths of horses at some of the most famous racetracks in America.
There's pressure to win, there's high stakes, there's big money. There also are problems like illegal performance-enhancing drugs, pain-masking drugs that are given to horses. There have been accusations over the years of reckless breeding.
After a set of high-profile horse fatalities, Congress passed laws in 2020 requiring oversight of doping and track safety.
I'm very aware of the public opinion of thoroughbred horse racing.
Fonner Park was one of the tracks fighting against those regulations. Chris Kotulak does think Nebraska needs to take animal welfare seriously.
And it's very important to show how we do care for these horses and show how in every industry and every sport there are bad actors, and we have to show that we get rid of those bad actors.
Not scaring off race fans is one issue. Not attracting new fans, young fans, is another. Bettors tend to be older men. Fans under 50 can be hard to find.
And the clutch that horse racing had is not there like it used to be 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago.
Ladies, did you all get judged for the contest right there? No, we didn't judge.
So when Kotulak walked through the Fonner grandstands in May, on the afternoon celebrating the Kentucky Derby, he was pleased to see groups of men and women in fancy hats, sipping mint juleps. Many appeared to be in their 30s. It's the age group most likely to gamble online and with phone apps.
I'm going for 4, and I'm 7. And she's number 7, and then she's got horse number 9.
You would have no idea there has been any dark days or dark decades for Nebraska horse racing if you just appeared here, not only on Derby Day, but any Saturday here at Fonner Park. We are jammed.
But the real test comes a few years down the road. Will the casinos continue to support the thoroughbred tracks? Will the casino managers like Harrah's or the Winnebago tribe subsidize the prize money needed to attract the best horses and jockeys? Remember Iowa and the Greyhound tracks? When the crowds started to thin, the casinos backing those tracks went to the state legislature in Des Moines and got the law changed. The casinos remained. The dogs are long gone.
Bucking the trend in Nebraska is the only way this state will survive, and we are blessed to have that opportunity.
As I talked to Chris Kotulak, construction workers hammered away at the casino at Fonner Park. His mind was on how the gamblers playing the slot machines could save the state's rebooted, struggling horse farms.
In Nebraska, it can be different because we have the infrastructure. People know how to breed, raise, and race thoroughbreds.
Remember when I mentioned Nebraska will be supporting the same number of racetracks as Kentucky? There's a reason that trivia is important. Nebraska would once again have a year-long racing season with multiple tracks, a racing circuit. The people pushing for casinos promised Nebraska voters they would be supporting home state horse farms.
So Nebraska thoroughbred industry has this wonderful low-hanging fruit for insular growth right here in the state. Breed, raise, and race a Nebraska-bred thoroughbred, and you don't have to leave Nebraska. That's the opportunity and the goal.
But there's a whole lot of wishful thinking, and hard to tell if it's justified, that's built around the memory of a horse track that vanished. The trainers, the jockeys, the fans, all talk about it like a mythical kingdom, the one that got the whole thing started 100 years ago.
I will tell you, I think Ak-Sar-Ben had its day, and it will forever be a part of the soundtrack of my life. You cannot not hear the bell to post. You could not hear the crowds. You could not forget that feeling of hooves down the backstretch. You could not forget the smell of dirt and hay and manure. You could not forget that feeling of winning. There's an excitement that comes with all of that, and maybe it's a little romanticized, but those shared experiences that created a community around Ak-Sar-Ben will not soon be forgotten.
You've been listening to Once Again, our exploration of history that's shaping the news today. It's a copyrighted production of Nebraska Public Media. If you like what you heard, leave us a review where you found us. It's produced and researched and hosted by Bill Kelly. That's me. Co-producer Emily Kreutz is the lead audio engineer. Arthur Jones helped with field production. Jeff Smith with studio production. Alexis Scargill, our media archivist, helped locate some of that great old audio. Editorial review is handled by News Director Jay Omar and Chris Husted with the Midwest Newsroom. And thanks to the voices you heard in this episode, Dale Johnson and Justin Cheney. Special thanks to the Nebraska State Historical Society as the keeper of state government records, including the State Racing Commission. On our webpage, there's a list of books, documents, and other resources we used to research the rise and fall of Ak-Sar-Ben, along with some photos you might find interesting. That's at nebraskapublicmedia.org/onceagain. While you're there, we want to hear from you, what you like, what you didn't, or ideas for future episodes of Once Again.
Once Again is funded in part by the John C. and Catherine S. Angle Charitable Trust in support of history programming on Nebraska Public Media.